Okay, what I want to do is I want to spend a few minutes looking at philosophically why do we write research papers? Now, obviously, most of you have probably written research papers before and you've spent some time working on the research process, but I want to go back and take a few steps back and say, as far as the academic or the history of the academic institution, why do we spend time writing these papers? And it goes back to a pretty interesting historical story that I'm going to kind of review the loose background on. And it goes back to a time when the Roman Empire was controlling most of Europe. So you can see here it was controlling a good portion of what's Britain and France and Spain and obviously Italy, with Rome being right here, kind of the center of the world, down into Egypt and the Holy Land, Israel, this area, and then Northern Africa into Turkey. It was pretty much what we would now consider, at least this part of the world, this is more or less considered Western Europe. And so Western Europe was controlled by the Romans up until around the mid 400s. I think it was 410 that Rome fell, somewhere in that range, roughly. So in the 400s, Rome falls. And when Rome falls, it falls because of Germanic tribesmen coming in from the north and pushing down and ending up conquering Rome and destroying. Here you can see this depiction of the fall of Rome. And so when this happened, Europe was pushed into what would be known as the Dark Ages. Plumbing and the architecture and much of the building that Rome had facilitated and organized and coordinated throughout the entire region started to crumble, and Europe was cast into a period of a dark period where things were pretty rough. And so when this starts to happen, there's a interesting counter event that occurs. Books are burned, knowledge is lost, and there's only one group of scholars that begin to emerge. Most of these were clergy from the church, had some affiliation with the early growing Catholic Church in the Dark Ages and the Middle Ages. And what these men would do is they would have access to these books, these ancient books, many times just scrolls, or we could just call this kind of the record of human knowledge that Rome had collected. And they would start reading these books, as you can see here, and studying them. And then what they would do is they would embark in a process of writing letters to one another. And so you'd have, different throughout Europe. If we go back to that map, throughout Europe, you'd have different monks sitting in different parts of Europe, and they would they would read these books, and then they would send letters to each other, and then they would respond to those letters. And this would all be based around the books or the knowledge that they had been studying, that they were trying to preserve and discuss and move forward. Well, as this starts to happen, this becomes, or many of this process became known as, in some ways, the loose background of the academic process. And so when you write a research paper, you're embarking in the creation or the maintenance, more or less, of human knowledge. And so the paper is the research paper is based on letters discussing knowledge that used to be sent between these monks. And so the modern day research paper, in its multiple pages, act as a process through which knowledge is created. And so if you take a look down here, you can see after the Middle Ages, and we move, so Europe is plunged into darkness for about 1,000 years. When that period ends, we move into the Renaissance. And in the Renaissance, we have a rebirth of all this knowledge that had been maintained and coordinated and kept alive. And so we have people like Michelangelo who start making complicated machinery and start studying human anatomy and start building, obviously, what's going to be the first helicopters. So this is where we get to this process of sharing information with each other through the record of a letter or a paper is how we maintain civilization. So the act of writing a paper or a research paper is the act of engaging in civilization and the creation of knowledge. And so this is the reason we write papers. All right, on to the details.